news this morning?
Hi, everybody. This is Higgy, and welcome to the No More Heroin Survivor Series. Before I do my introductions with my amazing guest, I'm going to play a song by Joe Nestor, the anti-bullying song. Let the audience build. Please take the time to share this out.
A 10-year-old little boy in my area killed himself today because he was being bullied. So I did some research and I saw that 800,000 people die every year from suicide. That's one person every 40 seconds. At 6 a.m. the alarm's going off. He knows he's gotta go to school, but he don't wanna get up. Starts to think he'll never be good enough. Every time he goes to class, he gets picked on and beat up. And he's tired of always being pushed around and shoved. All he wanted to be was accepted and loved. He starts to think, am I asking too much? As he rolls up his sleeves and looks down at the cuts, says it's over for now, over for me. Nobody cares, nobody sees. He starts to think that his life is doomed, so he locks himself away in his room. He says, no more confessions, mental depression is killing me. These therapy sessions, learning lessons, nobody's feeling me. They take the test and assess him like that's just healing me. But I don't know, the suicide obsession is real to me. So over for now, over for me. Nobody cares, nobody sees. Starts to think that his life is doomed, so he locks himself away in his room. Oh, 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 oh. I don't wanna be bullied. She holds her stomach in and looks at herself, but doesn't like it, so she takes some diet pills off the shelf. Oh, pops a couple, think that they're gonna help, but there ain't nothing that could erase all the pain that she felt, and she's tired of that. As her heart starts to crack, cause she's sick of the kids always calling her fat. She's tired of life and she's scared to grow up. Sticks her finger in her mouth and she tries to throw up. She thinks the only way to be pretty is to be tall and skinny. She's killing herself just to fit in with these other women. Scrolling through Instagram and social media, sitting in pity. She thinks her life is over, baby. It's just the beginning.
Such a powerful song.
Around and sleeping around with all these guys. It's the only way she knows to try and ease the pain inside. The love that she knows, the love that she feels. The saddest part about it, all she knows is none of it's real. But it's over for now, over for me. Nobody cares, nobody sees. She starts to think that her life is doomed, so she locks herself away in a room. And it's over for now, over for me. Nobody cares, nobody sees. She starts to think that her life is doomed, so she locks herself away in a room. Oh, 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 oh. I don't wanna be bullied. If you or somebody that you know is struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out.
Don't be afraid to reach out.
Share this. Spread the love, not the hate. I love y'all.
That's my dude.
Yeah.
Nestor Nation, the anti-bullying song. Thanks to everybody for being here, and welcome to the No More Heroin Survivor Series. And the Survivor Series is a live feed testimonial series of inspirational testimonies of people that have overcome seemingly insurmountable odds to have and live a life of purpose and destiny. And this is the Survivor Series, and my guest tonight is the epitome of what a survivor is. You are, as you say, a survivor with a capital S. Please, everyone, welcome Dallas criminal defense attorney Terry Bentley Hill, who is also a suicide awareness and prevention advocate. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Higgy. I'm so glad to be with you. I've just admired you for the last 2 years when we met here in Dallas, and man, you're doing good stuff. And thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you so much. That truly means so much to me. So much to me. I admire you. I admire your work. I admire your heart and your passion. Now, having said, given the introduction about being a survivor, you are a survivor of suicide. Would you please introduce and give the names of your loved ones that passed and their dates?
Yes. And thank you for letting me do that. And I just kind of have to take a deep breath, because, one thing about suicide, and for any of your viewers and your audience who've experienced this, I mean, they know that it never goes away. The pain never completely goes away. So, number one, I honor all those in your audience who are experiencing this and listening to this. But I also want to thank you for asking me to say the name of my loved ones who are no longer here.
Yes.
In 1995, I lost my first husband to suicide. He was the elected official in a town here in Texas, and he had suffered with alcoholism and depression. And after 11 years of marriage, our marriage began to fall apart. His job he was about to lose his job. He was suffering, like I said, with depression and alcoholism, and his name was Danny. And on
Danny.
Palm Sunday in 1995, he came into our home and he took his life.
Wow.
And our four daughters, who were 10, 8, 6, and barely 5, were asleep in their bed. And because he was a public official, Higgy, the media went live from our front yard.
Wow.
And reported that the district attorney has taken his life in the home where his children were sleeping. So, yeah, it was broadcast all over the panhandle of Texas, and then, of course, and Dallas and Houston. So there was no place for me to hide. In other words,
So sorry.
I mean, my life, the bomb went off in my life on that day. And I imploded, and part of me died with him. And so since that day, I have been on my own journey of recovery and survival.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, there's not just one, there's two.
Wow.
And 9 years after Danny's suicide, my youngest daughter, who was 14, she was suffering with depression. And on September the 8th of 2004, I got a phone call that every parent dreads, the dreaded phone call. And I remember what I was wearing. I remember where I was. I remember what I was doing when that phone call came in. And my husband and my new husband and I were notified that Hallie had died by suicide herself.
What a horrific and tragic sequence of events.
It is. And, it's hard enough to lose a person you love who's an adult, a spouse, a parent, whatever. But when you lose your flesh and blood, when your child dies, it is like you have been ripped apart.
Yes.
And there is nothing to there are no words to describe the amount of pain and feeling like I let her down, Higgy.
Right.
There were a lot of things that I went through, but fortunately, and this is going to sound odd, but the morning after she died and I woke up to this nightmare, I said, God, I want to thank you that I've already been through this once before. And the reason I say thank you is because I know I can get through this one, because I've already been through a suicide and I survived, and I was surviving. And even though this is my daughter, I know in my core and in my heart that I will survive this death too.
Wow. Such a gut wrenching, and it had to have just shook you to your core. I mean, two of your immediate family, and
right.
The amount of grief that consumed you at that point. What did you do with that?
Well, the first suicide in 1995 was on April the 9th, and that was a Palm Sunday. And the next week, of course, the next Sunday was Easter. And so it's so weird what you do. I mean, I dressed my children up in their little Easter dresses, which they wore to their father's funeral. And we went to church, and I remember sitting in that pew completely stunned. I was in total shock. And I looked down the pew, Higgy, and I looked at my daughters, and I thought, how am I going to do this? I feel like I feel like a shell of a person, and I don't know what I'm going to do now for these little girls. How am I going to take care of them? And in fact, 10 days after he died, I went into my bathroom, and I had a TV on my countertop, and I looked down, and there was this building that was going up in flames and collapsing in on itself. And I looked at that TV, and the only thing that made an impression is that's represented my life. And that was the building in Oklahoma City that a domestic terrorist had just blown up. But I looked at myself in the mirror, and the grief was so overwhelming that I didn't even recognize myself, Higgy, in the mirror. And so that building, I'll never forget that, seeing that building and just thinking that represents my life. And so I moved my children back to my hometown of Dallas because I needed to be surrounded by people, my family, my friends, my support system. And I got into therapy. In fact, that's the first time I'd ever gone into therapy. When I was married to my husband, because he was a public official and he had a drinking problem, we didn't tell anybody because we were afraid if we said anything about that. And I mean we, because as most of your followers know, it's a family disease. Yes. And so he was getting sicker and I was getting sicker. Mainly because I didn't reach out for help. I didn't go to therapy. I didn't go to a 12-step program. We lived in isolation and secrecy and shame. And so we didn't say anything because we were afraid it was going to
in the midst of a disease of addiction and mental health.
Exactly.
That's hell.
Exactly.
That's hell.
And you don't know what you don't know. I didn't know about depression, and I certainly didn't know about the disease of alcoholism. And so I just thought he was a son of a bitch, that he just wouldn't stop drinking and that he was a big jerk.
Yes.
And so it took a toll on our marriage, needless to say. And, after 11 years, it's just it was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. But if we had just reached out maybe for some help, then at least he might be alive. I mean, he may have lost his job. We don't know, but at least he would be alive, maybe. But at any rate, the grief was devastating. I got into therapy. I had to have purpose for the suffering. And that is one thing that I think most people can relate to, is that when there is a devastation like suicide, like this, that completely implodes your life, blows it up, there's got to be some kind of purpose that comes out of this. So I wasn't an attorney at the time, Higgy. My background is in journalism. And so I made a video with the public television station about my experience. And that video won the Edward R. Murrow Award for Best Television News Documentary in the Southwest. Wow. And it addresses our life and the family disease and alcoholism. I mean, it was back then in 1998, believe it or not, it was pretty cutting edge. I mean, you just didn't hear much about that. People weren't talking about it much. So I started talking publicly and taking that VHS and sticking it in a machine and presenting at these different groups. And some of them happened to be lawyer groups. And I always wanted to be an attorney because I covered the courthouse. And so I wanted to go to law school. This
is the beginnings of your advocacy journey.
Exactly. I took that documentary, and then I told my story live after showing the documentary. And I met my current husband, who, thank God for him, I don't know how he's put up with all of this, but I met my current husband, who's a lawyer. And after several years of marriage, he said, "Hey, Terry, you've always wanted to go to law school. Why don't you go to law school? Why don't you achieve your goal, your dream?" And I thought, I haven't been to law school. I mean, I haven't been to school in 25 years. I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't know if I have the concentration. Grief, it changes your brain. The trauma changes your brain. He took his life right in front of me, Higgy. And so that trauma is energy that bounces around in your body, and it gets stuck. It gets stuck in that amygdala.
Yes.
And that's part of the deal with trauma, which I'm sure you know, and have had shows on trauma. I assume so. But until you can move that trauma from the amygdala to the speech part of the brain, and then deal with it, it just bounces around.
I'm going through EMDR right now for my own trauma to help with my addiction. Yes. And what you're saying is so on point, because our bodies and our brain absorbs that trauma, and it has nowhere to go until we figure out a way to release it. And there's so many adverse reactions to trauma. There's physical, there's mental, there's the spiritual aspect. It causes a lot of chaos and turmoil within us. And the things you've been through just speaks volumes of who you are as a woman, the amount of strength, your faith. Was your faith ever challenged at any point?
No, actually, raised in the church. I knew I could quote Bible verses, and, this was my prayer when I was married. God, if you love me, you will stop this man from drinking. You will cure him of this problem, whatever he's got, because that will solve all of my problems if he just stops drinking. Well, that's the only way I knew how to pray. I'm going to tell you when I really met my higher power is when I got to the point when everything I had done to stop him from drinking, whether that be begging, promising, whatever it was, and it wasn't working, and it started getting dangerous. And what I mean by dangerous is that there were car accidents, and there were situations that my children, one of my daughters was in the car with him when he had a car accident. And so it was like, okay, there is something way bigger than me that's happening here, and I'm incapable of fixing this. So I just remember going into my bathroom maybe 8 months before he died, and I just said, God help me. And that's all I said was, God help me. And at that moment, I felt a spiritual connection that I've never had before. And that was, it was almost as if I finally surrendered and said, I can't do it. I need for you to do it, for you to help me. So actually my faith grew. And I had 8 months of the family 12-step program. And it's a good thing I had 8 months before he died, because I had a support system that came rushing in when he died. And I heard things like, this too shall pass. And I thought they were out of their minds. I have just experienced this. And what do you mean this too shall pass? And I would go to these open AA meetings and sit in there and tell them, why me? Why did this happen to me? And there was a guy I'll never forget. He came up to me and he said, why not you? Why not you? And so it was the 12-step family on both sides that helped me discover and learn who my God was. And I'll never forget, during this period of time, my sponsor said, I want you to write down every adjective that describes your God. And I want you to put that on your mirror. And when you're not sure what your life is going to look like the next minute, you look up at that list and you see who your God is. And you start writing things and putting it in a God box, because I tell you what, my anxiety shot off was.
I can imagine. Yes.
Anxiety, depression, my own depression. And so oftentimes when someone is a survivor of suicide, Higgy, they suffer their own depression. And so it's just kind of a vicious cycle. And my all my girls suffered from depression
Yes.
and experienced that.
Could you describe what the symptoms of survivor's guilt is?
Well, yeah. So there may be people who disagree with me, but I, I truly believe, and I've been told by psychiatrists, by professionals, and they agree with me, that suicide is the most difficult death to grieve. It is the most difficult death to deal with. And this is why. There are so many unanswered questions. There are so many whys. Our brain cannot help but ask the why. Why did this happen? Why is my loved one dead? Why was I not enough for this person to stay on this earth? Why didn't I do fill in the blank? Well, I should have done this. I could have done that. The only person who could answer the why question, Higgy, was gone. But I tormented myself with the why. And it became very personal. And that's the problem with surviving suicide, is it becomes very personal. And it's like, I should have been able to fix this. And even though logically I know I couldn't fix it, my heart didn't tell me that. I felt like I just wasn't lovable. And that if people really cared about me, they wouldn't be killing themselves. So
Right.
It became very personal, and I had to deal with that, but it takes a long, long time. And there will be people who will say, oh, suicide is just so selfish, whatever. And actually, it's been my experience that people die because they feel like they're a burden and that people will be better off without them. And so, in a way, it's an unselfish act, if you know what I mean. However, I'm going to tell you, if they had any idea the pain that they cause and leave behind, I don't know. I don't know if they could do it if they had any idea how much pain it causes.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your mind around all the factors involved. What led to this event. You know, the whys that would drive me crazy as well.
Yeah. And you know what I've learned, and it's been 15 years since I lost my daughter, even though every single day I think of her. And you never get over it. You just get better. That's all there is to it. I mean, I'll never get over it. It changed my cellular makeup. I mean, truly, when she died, I was a completely different person. But you do learn to live differently, and you can get better. And anybody who's watching this, if you take nothing away from this, you just take this one thing: I am still standing. And no matter what you go through,
That's right.
you too can continue living your life, and you will find joy again, because I have found joy again. And I can't believe I'm saying that. I mean, I buried a child, but there is hope and healing, and you just have to put in a lot of work, and it's tough. It's tough work. But one of the things I have started doing too, Higgy, is I've started a kind of a movement, and it is stop minding your own business. And what I mean by stop minding your own business is I have a friend who at 19 years old, he was suicidal, and he wanted to kill himself by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he went through this story, and he told me this. He said, oftentimes when a person is suicidal, they'll make a pact with themselves. If this happens today, I won't die today. I won't kill myself today, but I may tomorrow, but I won't today. And he told me that the pact he made with himself is that if one person asked him if he was okay, he wouldn't jump. And he goes through his entire day of encountering people. He's 19 years old. He's crying. He's sobbing. He's telling his parents goodbye, he thinks. He gets on a city bus to take a 10-minute ride to the Golden Gate Bridge. There's one seat in the back. He's passing all of these people, and he's sobbing. Not one person said, son, are you okay? And he gets to the Golden Gate Bridge and he gets ready to jump. And he said, I'll never forget that this lady started walking toward me. And he thought, okay, this is it. She sees me crying. I'm standing at the rail to jump over the bridge. She's going to say, are you okay? And I won't have to jump today. And she didn't. She said, hey, will you take my picture? And handed him a camera. And he went, okay. And handed the camera back. And he jumped. And this is the thing, as a mother of a child who died by suicide, that he said that has made the biggest impression on me. He said the minute he jumped, he regretted it.
I know that story. I know that I've seen that video so many times. And he said the minute his hands left I've got chills. The minute my hands left the railing, instant regret. And there was no going back. No going back.
And that's what he said. He said, my biggest regret is, and it only took him 4 seconds to hit the water. So in this period of time, he had regret. And he also had great sorrow and grief, because he said, I'm going to die and no one in my family will ever know that I didn't want to die. But see, the problem is, and he's only one of 43 people to ever survive jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge to tell his story. Most people those who attempt and achieve their goal, they can't come back and say, no, I really didn't want to do this. I just wanted to be out of pain. I just wanted to get out of the darkness. I was tired. I just needed a hand. I needed somebody to help me, or whatever the case may be. And they can't do it. But it gave me some kind of understanding that if we just say, any of us can say, are you okay? I'll never forget that.
Ask those probing questions, right?
Yes. And in our country, we're told, mind your own business.
Right. In recovery, we're told to stay in our own lane, mind our business, and clean our side of the streets.
Well, and that serves a purpose for sure.
In that realm. In that realm.
Yeah, exactly. But when it comes to someone who is struggling, and they're struggling, and you can tell because they're showing the symptoms, or they're saying speaking the language of depression, like all or nothing words. I don't have any friends. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. No one will sit with me at the lunch table. I don't know. Everybody will just be better off without. Those are red flags that we need to learn and teach people the language of those words and what those words mean. Because at that point, then we can all step in and say, hey, I'm not judging you. I'm not criticizing you. I'm going to ask you this out of compassion. Are you okay? I see this and I care about you. And I want to know, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of going away? Ask the question. Higgy, there are a lot of myths around suicide. And one of them is if you ask someone if they are thinking of killing themselves, you're going to plant an idea in their mind. No, you're not.
No.
They're already thinking it.
It's already there.
It's there. Exactly. So you ask the question, and then if they say, yeah, I'm miserable, or I'm tired, or everybody hates me and I just would be better off gone. Then you ask that next question. And this one's real important. Do you have a plan?
Do you have a plan?
You've got to ask the question. Do you have a plan? And if they say, yeah. In fact, I did that one time. I asked a gentleman, he had come up to me and he had expressed his state, his depression. And he said, I just want to know, what is it going to do to my kids if I take my life? And I said, why don't you sit down? I said, do you have a plan? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you know when you're going to do this? And he said, yeah, I'm going to do it Friday night. And I'm going to, and I know exactly how I'm going to do that. And I said, well, let's just talk about it. Tell me what's going on. And by asking those questions, when there's a suicidal crisis, Higgy, sometimes that relieves the suicidal pressure that some people are feeling. And you can get someone to pause. And half the time, that pause is what saves that person's life.
Yes.
And then there are things you can do. You can call 911 if you need to. Better mad than dead,
Absolutely.
And
if you can make them pause, you can make them second guess, right?
You can make them rethink. You can make them rethink, and it just relieves that. When I validate someone's pain, then they don't feel so lonely. And see, I think the biggest culprit with depression and suicide, etc., is loneliness.
Absolutely.
And if we can make a connection with someone, then it may make them rethink what they are wanting to do.
Because the connection is what they're missing, and they're not feeling. And if they can feel connection or anything with another human being, it might make them change their mind, might just change it for that moment. And one thing you were talking about, your friend, you said he went through the day 24 hours at a time. That, as we do in recovery as well, just 24 hours, so we don't get overwhelmed and think too far ahead. Get involved with future tripping is what we called it.
Right.
You know, the only time frame that matters is right here and right now. And
boy, that's a truth. That's a truth.
Yes, and you know, we were talking yesterday, and with the suicide rates skyrocketing, you know, with the younger generations that are taking their life, you know, far too young, you know, gone far too soon, far too young. It is become socially acceptable to take your own life, and we're doing this to hope curb that and to make people think.
Right. Well, the honest truth is that we are in a public health crisis in this country.
Absolutely.
The suicide rates are skyrocketing. It is undeniable. In this country, every day, Higgy, 140 people die by suicide. Think about this. That is like a 737 airplane crashing every single day.
Yes.
And my point is if that were happening, would the public outcry be such that we've got to find the solution? We've got to solve this problem. And until we find the solution, we're going to ground these airplanes. And we know that's exactly what would happen, because we grounded 737 Maxes that crashed in a different country.
Absolutely.
We need to have that much hysteria around the suicide crisis that we're experiencing now. We've got to do it. And you know what? We can do it one person at a time. And that is you and me and everybody else, just paying attention, dialing into people, and not being afraid to ask the questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It does. I'm trying to say this right. We have to take away the option of taking your own life. What in your opinion, what is the answer? What is the solution? Where do we start?
Well, I do think it's, again, number one is the people who have their stories, the survivors, the people who've either attempted suicide, the ones or the survivors of suicide with a capital S, tell your story. Because the more of us who tell our story, the less stigma is attached to the issue. And that is mental health. That is, I mean, you go to a meeting, an open AA. I go to open AA meetings all the time to hear the story, because the story is what inspires me. It is the destruction, and yet the spiritual connection and how that life can completely be changed. The story is transformed. I mean, I can't believe how the miracles that happen in people's lives. So the more of us who tell the story, then it decreases the amount of stigma and shame. And so we've got to change culturally how we look at mental illness. We need to teach coping skills to our kids. That's part of the problem, is they don't know how to self-soothe.
Right.
So what do? They go to the internet, they go to social media, or they go to drugs and alcohol, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we all need to learn how to self-soothe so we can have coping skills. So when the S hits the fan, then we don't go off the rails. And I have this
self-soothe versus self-medicate.
Exactly. And you know what? That's learned. And especially a lot of us who grew up in homes that were not nurturing, not
dysfunctional.
I know, yeah, exactly.
That.
I mean, you pick up the energy from your home. That energy bounces around in your body. It stays there. If you can't feel, which I could not feel I couldn't express my feelings very well when I was growing up. Just it made everybody uncomfortable. So we don't express our feelings. So I started biting my fingernails when I was 5 years old. I started picking the hair out of the part of my hair when I was in the 7th grade. And so I was exhibiting anxiety and depression, but nobody said anything back then. Nobody knew. And I lived with this all of my life. I knew on a certain level that something wasn't right, but I didn't know what to call it.
Thank you, Tamika.
So that's why, So that's why it's so important for us to say, hey, look, I'm in depression remission. I'm doing whatever I need to do. I'm going to therapy, I'm taking medication, and I am going to peer support meetings. And you really need all three of those. It's like a three-legged stool. You need all three of them to get better. I mean, studies have shown that. So that is what I have done is I've just really gotten involved with peer support and also helping other people. I don't have to tell you what's the best way to stay sober. And that's to help others, right?
Right. Yep. The next struggling addict or alcoholic or anyone with mental health disorder or even suicide. I've struggled with that as well, with PTSD and with the addiction. And they cross and the addiction, mental health, and the suicidal ideations are all in one category for me.
Right. Exactly.
They affect each other.
Well, and tell me this, Higgy. I know you've been sober for a while, and so do you still struggle with any suicide ideation, or once you got sober and you started the EMDR? I mean, did it help?
It helped immensely. I also started doing work with a spiritual guru that was working with my spiritual energy, and I started doing, the therapy and the spiritual work, working with other addicts, alcoholics, talking with other people that have the same issues, learning new coping mechanisms. And that's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of soul searching. But the EMDR has really had a significant effect on me. It's doing something with that trauma that's stored inside me that I've dealt with for so long. It brought such relief. I was 1,000 pounds lighter.
Really?
Yes.
Well, we talked about that trauma. I mean, thoughts create feelings, and then those feelings are energy. They bounce around our body, and especially with trauma. I mean, think about the difference between us and the animal kingdom. If an animal is being chased by a predator and somehow escapes, if you watch those Animal Planet shows, you'll watch that animal that escaped, they'll shake. Shake.
Yeah.
I mean, because they're shaking that energy from that traumatic experience out of their body. But we as humans, we don't shake. So that stuff gets stuck in there. And that is why it's so important to use professionals to help us get that trauma resolved.
Yeah. I used to shake inside, just anxiety, just rage, all these feelings I didn't know how to deal with, but manifested in all these unhealthy coping mechanisms and self-medicating. I didn't know how to process that.
Yeah, that's right. You don't. I know it. You got to have help. And, you know, a lot of people will say, what's the difference between sadness and depression? And I think the best way I can answer that is if a person exhibits certain character indicators for almost every day for 2 weeks, then they're probably sinking into depression, or they already have a depressive disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so people will say, well, what does that look like? I don't even know what that looks like. Well, for example, if someone has lost interest in things they used to love to do.
Yes.
Like if I didn't want to go see my grandson, that would be a red flag. Mm-hmm. So if I was very lethargic, if I wanted to isolate, which I have done before, by the way, I feel my depression in my head. It's like somebody puts a vice on my head and is screwing that vice. I can feel it in my temples. So I have isolated. I've gone into my cave. And so when someone starts to isolate, when they have excessive maybe sleeping or no sleep whatsoever, and that includes, there are people like me at times, it depends on what's going on in my life, that I can wake up at about 3 o'clock in the morning and I'll stay awake for 2 hours at night. And that could be a sign of depression, believe it or not.
Yes. I'll tell you one of the, for me, my depression manifested in constant fatigue, mental, physical fatigue. I lost joy in doing the things that I love.
Right.
And the overwhelming sense of impending doom at all times.
Yeah. So the depression feels heavy.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
The anxiety, it feels like there is a race car in your chest.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's definitely a people who have you seen people whose legs just shake.
That was me, just my up and down, you know, right. Just fidgety and just getting overwhelmed with simple tasks, not being able to process things, you know, logically. You know, my cognitive thinking process was just muddled up because I had all these racing thoughts in my head. I had this feeling like I was vibrating, like for no reason. Right. I just was always tensed up. I was angry. I was sad. I was emotional, and it was just miserable. And that led me to self-medication.
Right. Exactly. I know. And you know, speaking of the guy we were talking about who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and you mentioned this, one thing that he told me is that just because he survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge didn't solve his problems. He still has bipolar disorder, and he still has to treat it. And he has checked himself into the hospital 4 times because he got so depressed that he was suicidal again. But what he did, and this is what we all need to do, I think, in certain situations, is that he had a support team that he said, hey, look, if I start exhibiting these kinds of signs, I need for you to address them with me, because I may be slipping into depression or mania or whatever, and I may not even realize it. Mm-hmm. So you set up a support team that you give permission to approach you,
to call you on your crap.
Exactly. Terry, something's not right here. I mean, you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning sending 5,000 emails. I mean, something's not right here, you know.
My friend Erin Quinlan in the comments, she is my go-to person. She calls me on my stuff.
She does.
She knows when I'm up late in the middle of the night when I should be sleeping. She monitors me and calls me on it, and she knows the right questions to ask, and she knows what to
exactly.
And she's proactive.
Did you give her permission to do that? Did you give her permission to say
not
hey?
initially, but but I accept it because it's all love. And
Right.
with your friend, he was proactive. He put a plan into place to safeguard himself from ever finding himself in that dark, desolate, isolated, depressed state.
And dealing with the beast of depression, and it is a beast.
It is. It is. And depression, like addiction, wants us isolated, alone, and broken.
Yes. And you know, depression causes thinking errors. So you've got cognitive distortion right up here.
Yes.
And so you're going to be telling yourself lies and believe in it.
Yes.
And
you don't even know it.
So, don't even know it. And that's why it takes either a professional or people like you're talking about who'll say, okay, you're not seeing this accurately. That is not happening the way you're looking at it. And you're not worthless, you know, whatever the case may be, whatever the messages we're telling ourselves.
We have people challenging our thinking, right? When we aren't able to see the truth for what it is, and our disease is lying to us, which it does. My brain lies to me all the time, and you're absolutely right on point when you're talking about we can't differentiate the truth from the false.
No, not with thinking errors. No, and when I say thinking errors, it's just not, oh, I woke up and you know I'm in a crappy mood. No, it is a biological situation in the brain that the wiring is changing because you have depression. It changes the wiring in the brain.
Into the rocks in the house.
Hey, my buddy.
Terry Bentley Hill, official attorney for To the Rock radio show. We love you, Mike. Thank you for checking in with us. Thank you for the shout out on your promo for your show today. I love you dearly, my friend. Thank you. Hey,
and you know what? He introduced us, Higgy. So I mean, Michael's a special person. Will always be in my life. Always, I love him. Mm-hmm. So it's just been such a blessing to know both of you. And speaking of blessing, I can't finish this conversation without talking about the fact that when I was in the deepest, darkest part of my grief, I wasn't alone. I had experiences with my higher power, which I'm going to call Jesus. Okay. But
me too.
I want to share this story. First of all, I was going a week after I buried Hallie. I had gone to a shopping center where we have meetings in the morning. And when I got out of that meeting, there was a church that was right across the street, and a Catholic church. And those bells started ringing. I got in my car and I started driving right past that church, and those bells started ringing, and it was really loud. So much so that I looked over to see if there was a wedding or a funeral, but it was 9:30 in the morning on a Saturday. It didn't make any sense. So I didn't think much about it. I go down the street, I turn the corner, I pass another church, and right as I passed, those bells started ringing. And they were ringing and loud, and I had this feeling come over me, like, okay, something's going on here. I pull into my driveway, and I lived right across from a Methodist church. And as soon as I walked into my living room, those bells began to ring. And I knew then that I was not going to do this on my own, that God was there, and he was telling me that he was there. That was not an accident. That was a message that you're going to be okay. And I'm going to go through this and be there with you. And we're going to do this. And you can do this. You just have to rely on me every single minute. And you said something a minute ago about
you'll make me cry.
I know. Me too. It still makes me cry. And I'm telling you that that wasn't the end. I mean, that was the beginning. My other children have struggled, Higgy, needless to say, but there have been times when I would pass that church and those bells would ring again, and I knew he was telling me, it's okay, you're going to be okay, it's going to be okay no matter what happens, it's going to be okay. And I think what I have learned through this whole process is that I have to get out of God's way with people in my life.
Yeah.
They may not all make it, but I do know that he ain't going to leave me hanging if they don't make it. But I do need to get out of his way, because sometimes old Terry tries too hard and I get into God's way. And I think it interrupts the journey that some people are on.
Jeff Whitman says, love you.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's not up to me. And I don't know what the big plan is, but I do believe that God will redeem everything. And I know he's redeemed it in my life, and he continues to do that. But I have to keep my head right where my feet are, because if I think about it too much, I can go right back to that dark place.
Right. Looking for answers that you enclosure that you'll never find. And,
right.
The word that comes to mind is acceptance.
Exactly.
Acceptance for this is what it is. There's a lesson for me here, and I'm going to turn my pain into a message for other people, and you have done that loud and clear.
Well, I hope so. I mean, if it can help one person, and I know that sounds trite, Higgy, but it's so true. Mm-hmm. If one person can benefit from just me telling my story, then that is redemption. It's redemption.
That's right. The only real weapon we have in fighting the stigma is our testimonies.
Exactly.
And
that's right.
And we need more people coming up, stepping out of the shadows and giving their testimony. These testimonies of survival, these testimonies of overcoming, giving proof that redemption is a very real concept, and that you can live a life of purpose, destiny, gratitude, fulfillment, all of that.
Well, speaking of gratitude, when you asked me earlier, how do you get through it? Well, let me tell you some advice I got, Higgy. The day after my former husband died, the first woman into my house was in the program. And she said to me, Terry, you need to write a gratitude list. And I looked at her like she had 3 heads. I said, are you kidding me? What do I have to be grateful for? I have just... My former husband he's gone. He died in my house with my 4 little girls. I have nothing to be grateful for. And she said, well, let's think about that. She said, do you have a roof over your head? And she said, do you have food on your table? She said, do you have 4 little girls who love you? And do you have a bed that you sleep in? And do you have legs that'll take you from that bed to your bathroom sink? I said, yes. And she said, and do you have a toothbrush that you can use every single morning and every night? And I said, yes. And she said, well, then it seems to me you have a whole lot to be grateful for. And and so that from that day forward, I started a gratitude list. And it's not for the big things in life. It's for the toothbrushes. It's for the light bulb. I mean, it's for gasoline. I mean, it is for all of that stuff, and it makes me appreciate what I have and not focus on what I don't have.
That's right. Thank you so much for this message tonight. Thank you for taking the time to share your testimony with us. You have such a powerful message of overcoming, your message of survival. You are a example of redemption and what true survival is about. You are the epitome of what the show is about.
Oh, thank you, Higgy. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me to share my story. It really means a lot to me.
Where can anyone watching learn more about your initiative, Not Minding Your Own Business?
I have a website, and all you have to do is Google or just it's stopmindingyourownbusiness.org or .com. Either way, you'll be pulled up to my website, and you'll be able to see what we're doing.
Beautiful. Yeah, you've also started an Instagram page, hashtag Stop Minding Your Own Business.
Yeah, I need some help. Michael's going to have to help me with that. I don't
think he knows how to use Instagram either.
I'm old. I need help.
Yeah, Cynthia Smoot would probably be the person.
I know, right? I'm going to get her to help me.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Is there anything that you would like to say in closing? Any inspirational words of encouragement for anyone out there?
Well, just that there is healing, and to be real kind to yourself. Allow yourself to grieve. It takes a long time. Time takes time. I hate that, but it's true.
I hated that as well.
Yeah, and that there is life after suicide. There is joy after suicide. There is happiness after suicide. You will never be the same. You will always miss your loved ones. And I'm going to say Hallie's name again. Say the name.
Say the name. Yes.
Always say the name. It is music to my ears when people mention my daughter's name, Hallie. And don't be afraid to say the name. They lived, and they are living in me, and they are not gone. They didn't go poof. So it validates the love that I have for my daughter, for people to say her name. So say your loved one's name, say the loved ones of your friends who have died, say the name.
Yes, please, if seek out support. There are other people out there that have been through similar trials and tribulations and made it through the other side. There's an army of men and women out there that are survivors, that are making it, that have reclaimed their life from depression, from suicidal ideation, addiction, being a survivor, overcoming, the grief and loss issues, survivor's guilt. There is a way to get through all this.
Absolutely.
God will lead us through anything.
It's true. It's true. There are stories after stories after stories of that. It's so true.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Terry. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you.
Thank you, Higgy. Anytime.
I'd love to have you back sometime.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to give you a shout out. I'm going to give my husband a shout out. Hey, Tom, I'm giving you a shout out.
Hey, Tom.
And if Michael's still watching, I love you, Michael.
I love you too, Michael, as well. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please continue to share this. Share it with anybody that needs this message of hope, because there is hope. There is life after loss, and there's a way to make it through this terrible, terrible situation. Thank you guys for tuning into the Survivor Series. I'm Higgy. This is Terry Bentley Hill from Dallas. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, Higgy.
Thank you. Beautiful.